Hello and Happy New Year to everyone who is watching this. Welcome to 2016, and this is we are looking forward to a really great year, and I hope that everyone ended the year 2015 very strong. Today I have as two very important guests, Mr. Emmanuel Bioh, who lives here in New York, the United States. And Emmanuel has been working for a very long time in the field of healthcare in the United States and has done a lot of writing and quite some scholarship. It is actually my privilege to know him and to have been able to do some significant work with him over the last few years. And I also have Sir Paul Inyang, who resides in Maryland and who is not a stranger to this show. Everyone who's been watching us also knows that he has appeared here very often. He's also a healthcare professional, does a lot of work in the field of mental health in Nigeria, which brings him in regular contact with a lot of people in politics and in academics. And so, Emmanuel and Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks
And
for having
right, and before we proceed, I should also say that in addition to all of the great work that Emmanuel has done in other areas, he is joining the faculty of Adelphi University as an adjunct professor in the School of Social Work, starting in this spring semester, January. So, Emmanuel, I think I can actually say, welcome, colleague,
Thank you
and
so
I
much.
welcome you to the field of academia. And I know you'll enjoy it because I know that scholarship and dialogue in those areas is really something that you enjoy. So welcome, and I wish you a tremendous life in academia.
Thank you so much.
Emmanuel, Emmanuel, congratulations. I think that you already have the mindset for this, so you are going to do very well at it. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you in other ways, as the year progresses.
Yeah,
Thank you.
right. I don't know if I should call this good news or bad news because something tells me that that is probably one of the few areas in which there will be some agreement between the two of you today. It seems to me that that is the case because I know how you both look at Africa and life there and politics there and the current and the past state of Africa, who is responsible and how to get out of the problems there. But first of all, I'd like us to look back at the year 2015, and I want to ask you, in the area of politics, for example, um, focusing on West Africa specifically, but feel free to go outside of West Africa and to other parts of Africa. I would like you to highlight for me, starting with Emmanuel, what do you think were the biggest stories in politics in West Africa or Africa in the past year?
Well, I think for me, the biggest story is the re-election of President Buhari and his attempt to eradicate corruption in Nigeria. I think the whole continent of Africa looks up to Nigeria. I think it's the most populous nation on the continent. So I think the leadership of Nigeria is very critical in transforming the entire continent. And so I'm very thrilled to have somebody like Buhari as the president who is committed to cleaning up the mess and creating a just society that will promote the well-being of every single Nigerian.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure that many people will disagree with that point. I have certainly heard that from a lot of people from other African countries. And Paul, the same question to you.
I would say that I agree with Emmanuel that that is probably the major issue in politics in the past year. And our hope is that Buhari can carry out his mandate, which he got clearly from the country to eradicate corruption and to begin to work on building infrastructure in terms of organizations that can deal with this issue in a more proactive way. And I think that is the major issue in politics that we had this year. But there are some other issues which I think are equally as important. That is I would say also the consistent existence of conflict in Africa in terms of and how it is dealt with politically among the countries in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so that is the other issue that I would say was very important this year in Africa.
So, Emmanuel, what do you think, even as we consider the victory of President Buhari as an enormous event in Africa, what do you think led to his success against what was a very powerful machine? And then that's one question. And the other question is, how do you think he can surmount some of the obstacles that exist for him as president?
I think historically, any group of people who have suffered deprivation, have suffered under despotic governments, always look forward to a messianic intervention. And I think electing Buhari, in my view, is one of those things, that we need a charismatic leader who would transform the nation. And I think that in as much as that really propels and supports leadership of that nature, I think the transformation in itself lies with the people, and it's not ceding power into the hands of one person, who is Buhari, but people taking authority in themselves and empowering themselves to be part of the change and not rely on the leadership alone. Because I think Buhari single-handedly cannot transform Nigeria, in my view. I think he would need a broad support of the people and the ability of the people to be able to hold leadership accountable at all levels of government. Because I don't think he can do everything from the top and then address all local level corruptions. But I think if people at the grassroots are empowered enough and have the will to question the political systems at every level, I think that would be the best way to transform the nation. Because people have to be empowered enough to hold their leaders accountable. In Africa, we know that being an elder, being somebody in authority, you seem to command some level of unconditional acquiescence of allegiance, which in my view, it's not, in as much as people cherish that and we respect our elders, like somebody said, the old age of Methuselah has nothing to do with the wisdom of Solomon. I think that people should be able to question their leaders and question leadership and how power is used in their various levels.
Paul, you don't disagree with that, do you?
No, I do not disagree with that at all. But the underlying issue here is that of understanding what democracy really means. And in most of Africa, we do not really understand the complexity of democracy and the need, the difficulty in constructing change within that environment. For instance, if I could use Nigeria again as an example, there is a difference between the presidency and the legislative arm of the government, and and then there is also the difference between those two arms and also the legislative arm of government also. And most people do not understand that. That is in part one of the reasons that people think that Buhari by himself can solve these problems. But there's also a critical part of democracy that is not yet in this plan, which is what Emmanuel talked about, and that is the ability of the people to, the awareness of the people to, in understanding that they hold the power, and they are the ones who can really wield the power of accountability, because they can say no to issues, they can also say yes to issues. A good example would be in recent days, there is the issue of the legislative arm of government in Nigeria proposing that they want to give themselves new cars, which the cost of giving these new cars exceed $6 billion US. Now, the president of the Senate himself wants 11 cars for himself, 5 personal and 4 for his job. Okay, and they even have specifications for the cars. And even though this has been announced, the people are still far behind the story, and no one is reacting to the absolute absurdity of such a request. And that's what democracy demands, that you speak up and ask and call these people to order, so that they don't continue to abuse power like they are at this point.
First of all, let me acknowledge your agreement. And I think that Emmanuel used some very strong words when he said that transformation lies with the people. And the example that you just presented, Paul, is a very important one because I know that President Buhari had a media chat on New Year's Eve, I believe, which is really being praised worldwide because of how forthcoming he was and how he addressed all of the questions that he was asked very responsibly and competently. But the very next day, the Nigerian legislature actually issued a statement attacking him and telling him that he is president and that he has no say over what they do in the legislature. Therefore, he should keep quiet as far as the cars that they want to buy, the expense that they are going to be imposing on the Nigerian people, of which that's their business, not his business. And when that is the case, and you put that on one side, and then you also consider the fact that even as you, Paul, has just alluded, the Nigerian people are not even standing up to make demands, for their representatives to respect them. Emmanuel, how do you square both?
It's very difficult, and I think sometimes I begin to even question whether or not we in as much as I respect people's right to vote and to send people into government, sometimes I question the integrity of universal suffrage in Africa. And to some degree, it's not just even in Africa, even in the so-called advanced countries here in the United States. Um, but having a legislature like that is and a corrupt legislature like that passing laws, for me, is another form of legitimatizing corruption. Okay? Now, in the eyes of everybody, like as they've already argued, this is a legitimate body. We're here to make laws. And in the spirit of separation of power, Mr. President, you have no say in this. And so they can use that to really legitimatize their corrupt practices, such as voting to further their own personal interests, cars. So for me, again, I think the best way to address some of these issues, but it's very unfortunate in Africa, the so-called middle class, college professors, teachers, the clergy, people in the public servants have all themselves been constituted as another. In effect, they've all become dependent on a system where it takes away power away from them. They don't recognize the power they have as individuals and collectively to affect change. Because I think that if the middle class, this the what they call it, the labor unions in Africa or in Nigeria had come together to express their opposition to this so-called legitimatized corrupt institution such as the legislature, I think that will be the beginning for people in government to realize that, listen, we cannot take the people for granted, and that we need to be responsive to their needs and to the will of the people. But it seemed to me that nobody in the public sector, nobody outside the government is saying anything. The populace is quiet. The so-called educated people who are supposed to stand for the people, because like Locke said, education without social justice is corruption. They themselves are victims or beneficiaries of the same corrupt system, and I don't expect them even to rise up against what you just mentioned, against the legislature.
So, Paul, if one of the problems is that there is a lack of understanding of what democracy is, which is really what I'm hearing from you and Emmanuel as being one of the problems, can we make the argument that even the people who are the representatives of the African people themselves may not even know what democracy is? Because a part of democracy also suggests that there should be an accountability to the people because it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But you are both describing an African system where people who are in positions of authority actually see themselves as bosses who can do whatever they want instead of as being servants. So can the argument not be made then that even those who are voted into power themselves do not know what democracy is in some cases?
Yes, you asked a very critical question, and this is this is at the grassroots of the problem that exists in Africa and especially Nigeria. Yes, it is true that the legislative arm of the government is responsible for crafting bills and passing bills, but there is a process in which bills come to be approved and become law. It starts first with the House. It starts first with the people. The people tell their representatives what they want, and they now come up with a bill that they can pass. But this bill has to go through the president's approval. So the president has veto power, or he can accept the bill as is, or consider changes on the bill, which he now negotiates with the legislative branch of government. Then, even when when this becomes law, the justice system, the legislative branch of government, now has power to decide with the Supreme Court of the country decides whether it is constitutional the bill itself is constitutional. So there is a process for it that goes through the houses, the Senate and the House, to the president, and the president now either accepts or does not accept it. Then it goes to the justice system, which now decides whether it is constitutional based on the constitution of the country. So there is a process to it, and I think that when I look at the problem, I don't see that the people who got elected understand that process, and I'm questioning whether the president himself understands what that process is, because I'm not sure whether he's getting the right kind of advice to be able to do that. In this country, the president would have said, well, I don't like that bill, but pass it, bring it through me, and I'll veto it. And I'll veto that bill. And then there would be a negotiation between the legislative branch and the presidency to craft the bill properly. And then once the bill is passed and the president approves it, it now goes into the justice system where the courts, the people can challenge that bill through the justice system as to its constitutionality. So that is the process that happens in democracy, which we don't spend enough time talking about that process to our people so that they really understand that they have control over this process at both ends, where they can now tell their people, that's not what we sent you to do in government, and we will vote you out. Or if the people become adamant, and as they are in Africa, and suggest that they are the law unto themselves, they go to the courts and then challenge that bill. Wait, and from that end get it knocked off. So there are many processes here. I think part of what is the gap, which Emmanuel really talked about, was there's no awareness on the people as to what their rights are and how they can look at these processes and use these processes to get to achieve their end. This is what would happen in the case that I just mentioned, we just talked about, which is the car issue. It would be a simple matter if the people would just start saying, okay, we don't accept it. That's not what we sent you to go and do.
And
It's
then,
either,
go ahead, Emmanuel.
it's either
No,
you do what we'll vote you out.
yeah,
And that would,
Paul, I agree with the systems and how to utilize system, but I think it's based on the assumption that people who were elected have some level of conscience that we're going to serve our people rather than to become lords of our people. And also, the whole assumption is that people are really invested in the various candidates and probably sponsor them to stand for elections with the hope that they would go and protect their interest. In Africa, it's the other way around. Okay, people go into politics knowing that they're going to enrich themselves, utilize their own personal resources, and literally buy votes and occupy the various arms of government. I mean, from the legislature to the judiciary, people who are appointed into the judiciary are cronies of those people who get elected, either into the legislature or into the executive. Our cronies are people who know themselves and have no conscience that they are there to serve the people rather than to enrich themselves. And given the fact that people in Africa are so poor, it's very easy for these politicians to buy votes, and they buy votes all the time. And again, they're poor and they're ignorant, so they can easily be swayed. So what we're having is, even though we have all these various arms of government, they are all in cahoot with each other to exploit the people. So in as much as I have respect for the system and separation of power, I think for the lack of accountability, or for the lack of the people demanding accountability from their leaders, like if there's a system in place where if I elect or a group of a constituency, let's say Mr. Paul into the legislature, and Mr. Paul goes in there and make arguments that favors the interest of people in politics vis-a-vis the constituency. I think people should have a system to withdraw this MP. But currently in Africa, we don't have that. How many people can, at the grassroots, can obtain signatures and demand to withdraw their parliamentarian? That is the biggest problem. As it is now, I don't care whether you're in the legislature, you're in the executive or the judiciary. I believe strongly that they are all united in the expedition of plundering the resources of the country for their own good.
Hmm. I think that, I think it's getting better. But Paul, isn't what Emmanuel just said one of the problems? That he does not believe that the African people actually have any recourse when it comes to the people that lead them. Because here we can recall our politicians, the people that we vote for, we can recall them. The people can do that. And an individual can also go to court and sue over things. But what Emmanuel is saying is that because all of these, there is really no separation of powers, because you can't even trust aspects of the judiciary, because we all know that in Ghana just a few months ago, 15 judges were arrested because they were taking bribes, or they were exposed at least in the media because they were taking bribes, and so they were passing all these judgments that were really propelled and by the bribes that they took. So if the African people know that this is the system that they live under, do they really have any recourse in that part of the world? And as far as the Nigerian situation is concerned, even here, the power of the purse is in the hands of the legislature. So there has to be a great deal of responsibility. And so even if the president says, as he's saying in Nigeria, I do not agree with that, is that a kind of expense that will come before him that he can veto? And if it isn't, it's left in the hands of the people, right? Which is the argument you're making to go against it. But if the people really don't have that recourse because everybody's in cahoots, as Emmanuel is alleging, then and the people just left to always get shafted by powerful groups.
And sorry to interject here. Even you made reference to the Ghanaian judiciary system. I just want to make a reference. Even the worst case scenario was the disputed elections. I think 2 years ago, when the MPP supposedly should have won the elections, it went before the so-called Supreme Court. And what happened? The government in power was able to have it its way. And everything was held behind closed doors so that nobody would even get a sense of how the deliberation was taking shape. Listen, the judiciary is an extension of the executive.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with both of you on the premise. But I think also that there's a tendency on our part to see these problems as great difficulties. But I tend to look at when I look at them, I look at the problem itself, and I also look at the opportunity that exists within the problem to solve issues. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at in terms of the whole what Emmanuel said, like the entire group of people are in cahoots to take money to bastardize the system. I agree with that. But what we need to do is to educate our people on the opportunity that exists to challenge that. Because the only way we will build our institutions is if we understand that these are opportunities to challenge it and then rebuild our system based on that challenge. And so it becomes very, very critical in terms of making our people aware of these opportunities. Because these people are operating because the people do not really know how to challenge the system. Now, this is where civil societies evolve.
I agree. I certainly agree, and I think I've made mention of this argument in the past that I think Buhari can take advantage of his position now to energize the base. That is for him to begin to visit our colleges, meet with trade unions, talk to the ordinary people. I think you would be more successful if you have to be strategic, I think, in doing this. That is, look at the populace and find out which cream of people can you rely on to disseminate your information or disseminate your vision. And I think, in my view, would be the middle class people right now in Africa. That is people who are educated but are part of the corrupt system because they themselves do not see how best they can fend for themselves, especially for the future. And I think there are a number of changes that can be made in our system that would, to some degree, help people realize that, listen, it's not just now, but my future can somehow be guaranteed that I'll have a good pension, I'll have a good place to live. Most people who go along with the corruption is due to the fact that they don't see any future for themselves. So if Buhari can take advantage of them, build a coalition of middle-class people, and begin to institute systems, that would allow people to kind of own houses, for instance, that by the time you serve 30 years in public service, you would definitely have a place to retire peacefully. Your pension will be sufficient for you to live on. And craft a policy, an economic policy that seems to address some of the concerns of these people who have now become part of the corrupt system and then share that vision, I think that will go a long way to prop his government and prop his effort to transform Nigeria.
So I am also hearing a few things. One is that leadership has a responsibility to involve the people in government, and part of that is to improve awareness among the people. So the leadership has that responsibility. Leadership also has a responsibility, it seems to me you're saying, to ensure that there is a future generation that is being educated to take over and be responsible. Because if you look at Nigeria, for example, and you see what Buhari is doing, he's not doing anything that's out of character. He is a man who came into power because he had a good record of being an honest person who was very much against corruption. And he's showing that. But one also has to be concerned what happens when he's no longer in power? Who is going to do that when he's no longer in power? Nigerians, and in fact, all of Africans should be saying right now, it is actually unconscionable to be in power for as long as the prior administration was in power, and to loot the treasury so much that a new government comes into power and has no money at all to run the country because the other administration took everything. Africans should be saying that. But what I'm hearing from Nigeria, instead, even from religious leaders, I'm hearing a lot of people saying this is great, but I'm also hearing a lot of people saying he's been in office for 6 months and all he's doing is fighting corruption, and he should leave them alone and just. I actually saw a religious leader who said he should forgive them and move on. He should just forgive them. But of course, religious leaders who will also want to bank roles of politicians, which is unfortunate. But let's move on, and I want to hear from you what you think was or were the biggest stories in healthcare in Africa during the past year, West Africa or any part of Africa.
Well, I think that in terms of just to add on to what you said in terms of politics, and then we move. I'll get into the issue of healthcare. Is this that we need to constantly remind ourselves of our own responsibility in terms of this issue, because it is actually we are the ones who co-sign this issue. If you don't speak up, you co-sign the issue, you own it. And we need to really remind our people that it does not just stop with the leader, like a leader like Buhari. It is that we are part of the problem in Africa. And religious people are just as big a part of the problem also. Because we have a tendency to believe everything that comes out of the mouth of the preacher, and it's not because we want to do it, but because we are believing people. We are believing people, and so the man who stands at the pulpit is really important in our lives, in terms of the psychology of our lives. So it is important for us to be able to believe them. But at some point, we have to have a critical ear, and so that we can make better decisions. Where it is you can think of something logically and see whether it is rational in the first place, and then decide whether you can believe it. So, but I guess I will have an opportunity to wrap up, so I will be able to say more about what I think. But in the terms of healthcare, I think the most critical issue that came up in healthcare is the issue of the Ebola issue, and it's what the Ebola issue pointed out to us is that we have a problem in our countries, because there isn't enough investment in the health infrastructure to be able to deal with issues like this is something like Ebola. There's no anticipation on our part to deal with these issues, or to set up structures that will be able to deal with with such such a disease, and which includes the fact that we need to educate our people as to what is appropriate to do and what is not appropriate to do. A good instance would be this: there are some places that in Africa that you read today. We all know that the Ebola came from monkeys somehow. If that we can accept that premise. But there are some places in Africa today who say, we've been eating monkeys for years, and we are not going to stop eating monkeys, irrespective of whether there is Ebola or not. But government, on the other hand, doesn't have a process to deal with such a an infection that can overtake the country. And one thing, but the other thing that it showed was that it is non-discriminatory. It didn't matter whether you were a politician, whether you had money, or whether you didn't have money. If you were in the way of this disease, it will take you too. So again, I'm looking at it as an opportunity for Africa to build its infrastructures. What will keep this thing going for the future generation is that we build solid infrastructures. When you have solid infrastructures, it doesn't matter who heads it. They will come in and deal with the issue because the infrastructure is solid, and it will challenge him if he chooses to do something to bastardize the system. So I think that, again, it points out the fact that we need to build our infrastructures to deal with issues like that. But I saw Ebola as the most critical issue that came in Africa, But there's also, the list of issues are many. One is HIV, which is still continues to be an issue. The other is malaria, which is as old as I am on Earth. Then there's river blindness. There's also the big issue of immunization. Those are the critical issues in healthcare that I see.
Emmanuel.
Very interesting. I personally do not even separate healthcare from the entire political dispensation. I think it's part of the whole setup, because it also boils down to the fact that what are the priorities of our leaders? What are the priorities of people that we elect into government? And again, as you mentioned, Ebola has no respect for people in politics. But the bottom line is, if somebody in politics had money and contracted Ebola, he would have the first world-class service. Either have to be flown out of the country to get treatment, or utilize resources to bring expertise to his care, which the ordinary Nigerian, Ghanaian, or Sierra Leonean would have. So again, it's still self-serving. For our leaders, they don't even look back and say, what are our priorities here? Malaria, the mortality rate in Africa, 44% mortality in Ghana is attributable to what? Malaria. So the basic thing the government can do is improve housing. When we improve housing and improve sewer systems, we can cut back our mortality rate by 50%. We don't even have to wait for episodic diseases such as Ebola to draw our attention to what we need to do as people. But the bottom line is that our leaders do not have vision. And because they cannot be held accountable, I think they are running with it. And everything that they do is in their own best interest. Because when they get sick, they can be flown out of the country to get medical care elsewhere. And I'm pretty sure most of them even have dual citizenship, have dual passports, and can just leave Africa to any advanced countries to have their medical needs met. So it boils down to the fact that the middle class African with some level of education should be inspired enough, empowered enough to say, listen, this is what we need to do as a people. And that is not happening.
That is an important point. I think you both make very important points. And going back to Ebola specifically, I actually have a question for you. One is based on what I actually think, because I think that as far as dealing with Ebola, Nigeria showed what you can do when there is political will and money, because Nigeria has money and Nigeria had the political will to fight Ebola. Things, especially the money part, which Sierra Leone did not have, Guinea did not have, Liberia did not have. But even when I think about that, and that's the basis for my question, do you think that even the Nigerian government would have fought Ebola with that urgency if Ebola had not arrived in Lagos, but instead landed in some village in Nigeria? Do you think the Nigerian government would have done anything before everyone in the village was wiped out? It happened in Lagos. I mean, that's where people died. That's where Ebola landed from Liberia. And Lagos, we know, is the commercial hub of Nigeria. A lot of politicians are there, a lot of wealthy people are there. So the Nigerian government rose and fought it. But what if it had happened in some remote part of Nigeria? And it was in the news every day. Do you think the Nigerian government would have expended that amount of time and money or even effort to address it?
I think the stroke of luck in the case of Ebola and Nigeria was that the government was able to isolate the problem. And we were really lucky that it happened in Lagos because it is a city that is, if you look at the city itself, it presents opportunity to create that isolation. Now, if it were happen, like looking at your question, if it were in the rural areas, I think they would have still responded, but it would have been more difficult for them to isolate the issue because there isn't that education. Again, we are going back to the same issues, which is the ill management of institutions and the underdevelopment, which falls into the category where Emmanuel was talking about in terms of poverty that exists within the country. We were just lucky. We were really just lucky that it landed in the right place where you had also had a visionary government in that state, led by Fashola, who immediately identified the problem and went to work on the issue. If it had landed in some other state where there was a tendency to say, "Oh well, these are problems that will go away without doing anything," it would have. I mean, we would have had the same scenario, and all that would happen is that we would all cry about it because we would have relatives that were lost to these issues and stuff like that. But I think we were incredibly lucky. We were incredibly lucky, landed in the right place, and we had the right people on ground to deal with the issue, and they dealt with it appropriately. I think that's where they made some mistake. But I think that it still does not address the issue for opportunistic infection and mass infection in the future, because I am not sure that there is a proactive element of this where the government is looking and say, well, if in the future we have something like this, how do we address it? Because
In terms of the healthcare and the responsibility of the government to the people in Africa, let me also mention a few things that happened this past year. In Nigeria, uh, there was some flooding that affected about 300,000 people in northern Nigeria because of infrastructure. In Ghana, there was flooding that killed over 200 people.
Mhm.
We still do not know, still do not have those governments at the time actually expressing regret and apologies to the people or some compensation to those families that were affected. So where is the responsibility when government does not provide infrastructure to prevent disasters like that? I think that's part of what you're talking about.
Mhm.
So right. So if you tie that all up into the level of security in Africa, how do you consider the fact that we have had that in 2015, for example, Mali was in such severe crisis, still is. Burundi is still in crisis. And in Nigeria, it's much better now. But there was a day in Nigeria, which was just before the Paris event in early in the year, where over 2,000 people were killed in one part of Nigeria by terrorists. So I'm just wondering, do we in Africa have governments that don't get shaken unless their family members have been involved in crisis? Emmanuel.
My simple answer to your question is that there's complete lack of commitment to serve the people. Okay, they will do just enough to ensure some level of stability, so that productivity can continue, so that they can continue to amass their wealth. There is no, let me put it this way, strategic planning with a long-term vision to ensure that the basic needs of our people are met. I don't see any government on the continent with that level of determination, and it's very unfortunate. And again, it comes down to the fact that they are having a free ride. They have a bunch of docile people who would not question their integrity and the things they do. And as a result, they can do whatever they want. It's a very sad state of affair, but that's the truth.
Paul.
Yeah. Dr. Ohiro, I come from a state in Nigeria where the former governor once said that we have the best flood system in all of Africa. Okay, and till today, when it rains, a significant part of let me just say, a significant part of the capital city is flooded. And yes, purportedly, we have the best system in Africa. In fact, it was on TV with Julius Berger in front of them saying that they had built this massive structure that would address all the issues. But yet, if we have a light rain, portions of the city are totally flooded. Okay, and we can't go back to the people who set up this system for us and say, okay, correct our system. It behooves us to work to solve our own problems. That would mean that we have people who are dedicated to do that, just that, dedicated to serve people. The only reason you are elected in government to do it, to work, is to serve your people. You have to first see yourself as a servant. To the extent that Buhari himself succeeds, he has to see himself as a servant. And this is what we need to remind him constantly. You are a servant. Do your job, but also we have to recognize that we have a responsibility for what is happening. Because if you ask me, if you ask me if I'm thinking like a true African, if I can drive to my place and have a nice road and have a few houses built in the community by people who are local people who are involved in government, the tendency in Africa is to say kudos. We celebrate that. We celebrate mediocrity. So we have not developed enough to place on excellence. But it comes back to us.
Good point.
So, what is Emmanuel? What is your expectation for
No,
the
I completely endorse Paul's position on this. It's going to be an arduous task. It's not going to be easy because, unfortunately, people in diaspora, some of them very well educated, are still ignorant about social change and social systems. And so it's really going to be very difficult. But I think we can begin the journey with these discussions. I think we should issue a clarion call to all minimum people from the continent of Africa, to begin to look at this issue and build a core group of people here in the United States, and hopefully extend our conversation to certain individuals in Africa. Thank God with technology will allow us to do that. I'm pretty sure there are people who share this vision with us, but given the context of the situation they find themselves in on the continent of Africa, may not be able to engage with their colleagues at that local level because of so many things that we've alluded to in our discussion. But if we're able to sow seed and begin to build some type of alliances at all levels, and my concentration is really on the middle class and our university students and possibly high school students, to kind of encourage them that they have power, they have the right to self-determination, and they can affect the governance of their society, and that they have a right to demand accountability from their leaders. I think that will transform the political landscape of Africa. It may take time, but when people become aware of their own empowerment and their own strength to affect change, I think that would be the best way to go. Because I think there are two ways to affect change. Either you do it by de facto, which we've tried so many times, by imposing some type of a will, or by de jure, which is what we're trying to do here, to begin to have these discussions and build some alliances with people for which the future depends on. And I'm talking about the young generation and young college professors and teachers on the continent of Africa.
So, does any of you follow African sports?
Limitedly, yes. I do follow.
Emmanuel, I guess not.
I'm very limited. I'm only interested in the African Cup of Nations and the World Cup qualifying series. Other than that, I'm very limited interest.
Yeah, I watched the Under 21 World Cup soccer. I think it was probably about 2 months ago or a month ago. And I thought it was great news that the two finalists were West African countries, Nigeria and Mali. And that's when I actually found out that the year prior, it was also two African countries that made it to the final, Nigeria and Ghana. But one of the things that I was somewhat disappointed about, but maybe I shouldn't have, because that's the pattern, uh, was that was that that accomplishment did not make a big splash in international media.
Yes, you're right about that. You're right about the fact that it did not make the splash that it needed to. But I think that our media, and I say this tongue in cheek now, our media are somewhat part of the issues that we have discussed here. For instance, I'm sure you've heard about what I would call Dasuki Gate now, right? Okay. A chunk of the money that was given out was to the media. Okay. Now they're in a hurry to return the money. Now let me say,
Please explain what the Suki Gate is. I don't know if Emmanuel is
I'm not
aware of.
sure.
Okay.
okay, where the national security advisor in the previous government uh, said that he was given authority by the president to get money from the central bank, and the money was really to fight the conflicts in the northeast part of the country, to arm soldiers, to buy proper arms to prepare the soldiers,
To
and
fight Boko Haram.
to fight Boko Haram. But what ended up happening with the money was that the money was used for other means. It was divvied up. It was divvied up in many proportions. Some went to arms of the presidency. Some went to political leaders to propagate the return of the last government. But one of the groups that got the money was the press corps. The press corps got some of the money, but now they're in a hurry to return this money because we now have a picture of the brown bag syndrome. Have you ever heard of Emmanuel brown bag syndrome?
I'm assuming that money hiding in the bag to be delivered.
In this country, when we say brown bag luncheon, it is a luncheon to discuss issues. That simply means you come with your sandwich in a brown
Oh,
bag.
yeah.
Okay, here in this country, that's what it means. But in Nigeria, if you have the brown bag, it means that you have to placate the people with
Yes.
you bring your parents the expression Ghana must go back with money, and then you give the
Yes.
you give it to the press corps, and the press corps leaves there singing your praise and all you have done. So this is what basically happens. Imagine that happens. How do you correct the problem? It just shows you how endemic the problem is. The press is preoccupied with other issues, so nobody really promoted the fact that here you are, a country has won the World Cup for the fifth time at that level. Okay, that in itself is something to celebrate, right? You would think that, but it was never celebrated, and this is where you encourage the young people. I can tell you that looking back at that issue, that those players that played at that level, that performed so well, most of the performing players will disappear. You won't see them in the national team. You won't see them at any level. Maybe if they are lucky, they get a club level appearance and get paid for their service. But there isn't an encouragement to take them at their, because of these political issues that we have raised. Especially in Nigeria, the NFL has been known to engage in politics all along. So it isn't necessarily that you know how to play soccer. It is more so that who you have in power there and what he wants to do with that. And any coach that comes and fights that issue means that they are gone. First of all, they are just now beginning to hire local coaches. Before, they weren't intelligent enough to handle the work. Can you imagine an African telling his fellow African, "You are not intelligent"? We hear that here all the time from from other people here who say that we are not intelligent enough to do the work because we are black. And yes, the African stands in the way and says their own person is not intelligent enough to handle a club. What is a soccer match? You say, what is a soccer match? Think of it. What is a soccer match? Why couldn't we handle it ourselves? So that's my challenge with following sports in Africa, because it always comes back to the same thing. The organizing institutions are not run properly, and the institutions are not built properly, so it doesn't do the job that it does. Once in a while, you rise up. You have people who rise up and do excellent things, but the institutions themselves are not strong enough. It goes back to our problem, which I say is we now have to concentrate in using this opportunity to build our institutions to address issues.
Emmanuel.
Yep. With our institutions, no matter good intention the person is, he would still be corrupt. There is this crime of opportunity that even people who have great good intentions eventually become corrupt because they have access to money, but nobody really asks them to account for it. And so they borrow out of those monies to do things with the intent that they will replace them or pay back, but then nobody's holding them accountable, so it slides. And over time, that person gets corrupted. So,
Right. Sure. Emmanuel, let me explain aspects of this Dasuki Gate. When this new Nigerian president, Buhari, his administration, arrested the prior national security advisor to the former president for corruption. This administration, Buhari's administration, was widely criticized by this media,
mhm.
and they came up with these stories that President Buhari's administration was going after him because he had been part of a coup against Buhari many years ago, and this was vendetta. Now it appears that because of what Paul was just saying, all of that story, really was to discredit the motives for his arrest. And now the man is singing, and we're hearing all these stories, including the fact that the media was on that payroll and that some religious ministers were actually on the payroll. So this money went wide. A lot of people, including a story that a blogger who now has a mansion in Nigeria, was part of the take. Maybe she wasn't, and maybe she was. I don't know. But the story now, really, as it appears, is that a lot of people were on the take. And so, where is the outrage among the ordinary people whose money was used in this way? But what we found is that it is not true, and that's what I hope Nigerians will learn now, that there are no victimless crimes, even at that level. Because the soldiers who should have been equipped with weapons, this was money that was meant for that. They went against very, very highly equipped Boko Haram, and they were getting killed, and their families are not being taken care of because the government was so corrupt that it did not do what it was supposed to have done to protect its own soldiers. Now we have so many widows, we have many children without fathers, and who is going to get punished? Hopefully this guy gets punished, but it's more than that. Are they going to arrest the religious leaders, the politicians, the journalists? Everybody was on the take. I guess that Paul was probably the only one, and he did not like the fact that he was one of the few people who did not get part of the money.
Exactly.
So it's really bad, and I think that what we are seeing is that not only that it's possible to develop a template for corruption, to fight corruption, but that corruption is so endemic in the Nigerian, I dare say, African system, that it's going to be hard to fight it. Because as President Buhari is fighting corruption, corruption is fighting back. Really, really hard. Corruption is fighting him really hard. It's not a joke. It's not a joke, right, Paul?
Yes, I say this, that again, I'm choosing to be a little bit optimistic, and that's generally because what you do, as you know, Dr. Ohiro, in psychology, is that you look for opportunities to empower your people. And so I have a tendency to look at these issues, although the problems are real clear. But again, we have to go back to where the solutions lie. The solutions lie with the people, involvement, participation, and it also lies in demanding sustained, patient, and integrated response from government. And I think that we have an opportunity to educate our people and to sensitize them to these issues. Again, I always wrap it up in a psychological. It becomes a psychological issue for me, which is where you go to raise the minds of people, to get them to think about solutions. The Nigeria I grew up in was a Nigeria of solutions. When I left the country, there was 24 hours power. There were many things. We were all hopeful that we would go back home and serve. Unfortunately, the climate changed and most of us got stuck. But that notwithstanding, what I would say is this, to the person who has been working in Africa and tirelessly on these issues, is that you and us need to connect and understand that the issue is beyond us and that we need to work together to raise solutions for Africa. And until we do that, we will still have the problems. I want you to know that all countries that struggled with these issues of development and being a sustaining economies looked outside of themselves to their people who were outside the country and brought them into solutions. That's how China developed. That's how Korea developed. That's how Japan developed. And if we think that we are the only ones who can ignore the expertise of those who have been outside of the country, then we are in for peril. I think that we need to understand that we need to build a coalition to address the issues of Africa.
Emmanuel, I want you to respond to that against this background that in a Nigerian experience, for example, many of the corrupt people in today's Nigeria are people who actually lived in this part of the world, and they are back there very corrupt. What is accountable for that? What can we attribute that to?
Well, a simple answer: the Stockholm effect. You know, you cannot go single-handedly, in my view, to go and effect change in the corrupt system so embedded and rooted in our culture as an individual. I think, as we mentioned earlier on, is to build coalitions, build some awareness, have a group of people to work on that issue. But other than that, as an individual, there are two options. You either join us and benefit from the corrupt system, or you die and leave your children orphans, if in fact you want to do it single-handedly. So I think we're on point by building alliances with people so that we can effect some level of collective change. That awareness will transcend beyond our immediate group. And especially when we're able to come up with simple solutions to simple problems in Africa, such as housing, water, sewer management, which in fact, think about this. The government may not even have to use its own money, but it's a matter of attracting investors who can see that they can make money to engage in affordable housing, for instance. If we address affordable housing, where people can have decent homes with sewer systems, and we are reducing diseases by so many percentage, I think that's an easy sell, which would not even be immediately costing the government money. But the question is that you tap into already resources that are currently available, manipulating interest rates on housing. Here in the United States, the government is involved in the sale of housing. You know, we have government-backed loans. Why can't the government do the same thing in Africa? That people who really want to purchase houses can purchase a house at a rate of 2% instead of 30% interest rate that we have, which is killing the economy. And imagine how many investors will even look into housing. And now it's happening in Ghana, for instance. I know there are builders who are now invested in providing or building low-income housing. But it's not accessible to the ordinary Ghanaian because how much is the interest rate? 30% interest rate. When would it take you to pay off? So just by manipulating the interest rate, people in Ghana, public servants, can own their own homes. Just by the government saying, listen, all mortgages will be at this rate. I think it's not always, we cannot always rely on market forces. You know, there are situations where government has to intervene and make sure that demand and supply is not the only way to allocate resources. But there are some essential things that the government can look at and make sure that people can have them. And as people have hope, and as we continue to educate them, based on our premise, or based on our arguments, and they see hope, I think they are more likely to work with us, rather than to wait for the government to work for them.
So we continue to have plenty of work to do.
It's a lot of work.
And I hope that 2016 will be one of those times when we can look back in future and say that was when change really began to move in a very fast pace for Africa. I am not saying that with remarkable confidence, but I say that with as a wish, really. And I hope that that wish can become hope, for me. And we are going to continue to have dialogues like this, and hopefully we can also begin to make a difference individually with the people that we meet. Do you have any final comments?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is this: 2016 is one that I am praying and hoping that will be an opportunity for us to be more involved in what is going on in Africa. And that's my commitment to Africa and my homeland. And my hope is that, like me, others begin to see the opportunity that exists to create the kind of Africa that we want, because it is going to be us who will fix this problem. And we cannot stay and only point fingers as at the problems that are going on there, but we have to be a part of the solution. It is only when all the decent animals refuse to go to the party that the vultures take over. It is until all the animals, the decent animals, commit to it, then it is the vultures' party. So we need to be part of that party and say that we are going to be here and we are going to be there to work with the issue. I am optimistic. I'm really optimistic. I don't know why, but I am optimistic. Like you, Dr. Ohiro, it's not based on experience or the fact that I think that it's going to happen. But I know that I just believe that we need to and have to make some commitment to change in Africa.
And I think, and I'll add that the commitment starts now with this forum that we have. But I think we should begin to issue invitation to people so that we can begin to build some level of coalition. I think we should begin to have public symposia to discuss some of these issues. And I think our presenters over time will evolve into some group of people, a network of people who can connect. Because, as you know, in a network theory, one person can connect us to multiple sources and begin to build that coalition and alliances that I'm talking about. Because without building alliances here and back home in Africa, we would not be able to succeed. It has to begin from a core group of people.
I completely agree with you. And I was laughing when Paul was talking because, like me, um, mine was a wish and yours was hope. And but you also said it's not hope that's based on any kind of evidence. It just reminded me of how we operate as Africans. We don't need evidence to believe. We are just faithful people.
Yeah.
And so every year we continue to hope. And so I thank you very much. And we hopefully will have reason to be joyful at some point before the end of the year that Africa has taken a completely different turn and that it's going in the real great direction. But I will see you again here very, very shortly. And I hope that this is a really, really great year for every one of us. I know that last year was great for every single one of us, but I am hopeful that this year will be even greater. Thank you, and we'll continue to do the work that we have to do.
Thank you so much for
Happy
having.
New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
Okay.